What I would like to very quickly talk about is a dispute that's just begun in East Sussex, which I'm really grateful for a minute or two to explain, because I think it's very relevant to what you're talking about today. As I'm sure you're aware, centrally delivered services in education have been cut far harder than education services delivered through schools, so what comes directly from the county council. Part of that cutting process in East Sussex is recently they've restructured the special educational needs department. Now, under the restructure, originally there was plans to remove school teachers' paying conditions from teachers of the hearing and visually impaired, from what's called the LLSS service, Language Learning and Standards Service, which kind of deals with children with statements and support Senkos in schools, and the early years service. Now, through the restructure process, we've been lobbying very hard to keep our members on school teachers paying conditions. They are, after all, teachers. Two of those services we've managed to keep. One they are going ahead with and want to remove school teachers paying conditions from, and that's the early years service. We need to fight this, and we've only just begun this campaign. And really what I'd be asking is that the Campaign for Education can pass round when we are going to have to begin petitioning and getting counsellors and people informed about what they're doing to the early years service. Essentially, the early years service highly specialised teachers who pick up on and support both preschool and reception teachers with children that are likely to be statemented when they come into the school system. This will see them receive thousands of pounds worth of pay cut. It will mean their per hour rates, because they will be removed from the protections that school teachers do have, and they're all too slight. Their hourly pay rates would massively drop, but we're very, very worried about the future of the service at all, because you are not, in our opinion, in the union's opinion, you're going to be able to recruit the skill and expertise you need if you're not going to pay a going rate for the job. And we do not believe, just because the children involved are 5 years old and below, that the expertise is any less, and the need for adequate pay is any less. Unfortunately, what the county council appears to be suggesting is they still think they will be able to recruit because there are so many people leaving teaching. Well, that's not, in my opinion, a good basis for recruitment to an early years specialist service. So we've gone. The union has already gone into a formal dispute. We're consulting our members over industrial action to try and defend paying conditions. But I just wanted to take this opportunity, seeing as this meeting was happening this week, to alert you to what's going on. Yet unfortunately, I think it says all too much about the attitude towards early years that can easily happen amongst high level of council officials, and that if and when we do need to call on support, that we can put that round so people know what's going on and help us defend those positions for the benefit of those teachers in particular, for the benefit of the other teachers in central services who are likely to also see their terms and conditions intact if we don't protect these, and also, of course, for the benefit of the young children they support. Thank you.
Thank you, say, sort of following on from that, and I think very close in connection with that, is the development of early years teacher status, which is followed on from early years professional status, which is the status for people working with 0 to 5s. Practitioners, graduate practitioners who are professionals and the experts in their field in the early years, not with 0 to 5s. They have the same entry requirements for early years teacher status as qualified teacher status does. They have to follow the same standards, very similar standards, teacher standards early years as opposed to the teacher standards. They are working at the same level, and yet they do not get the pay and conditions that qualified teacher status does. Early years teacher status does not track the same pay and conditions as qualified teacher status, and this to me is an attack on the early years, and is a really important issue for us as an early years workforce to highlight and raise. That why is it that we are constantly marginalised and constantly the second class citizens, when in fact we are doing the most important job with the youngest children.
You're absolutely spot on. The enormous irony of what the county council do is they are still requiring anyone who takes on these roles to have qualified teacher status. They're still saying we won't pay you as
Brilliant. Has anybody else from the floor got a question for the panel?
Can I just
yes, Richard,
just
of course,
make a
absolutely.
very good point. I know it's often not very helpful to take a to take a party political stance, but I think I'm in quite a safe area to take a party political stance. Being a Green Party member, which I am, you have got a local member of Parliament here, Caroline Lucas, who would come 100% behind both this campaign you're setting up, and also she would support these, whatever campaigns you want to start. So do contact her, and if you want me to contact her, I'm happy to do that, because she will absolutely pile in behind you.
Thank
Absolutely
you,
promise
Richard.
it.
And I think she has shown her support for the campaign for
Yeah,
education.
excellent. Yeah.
Definitely. Yes, Nadia.
Thank you to the panel for some really, really thought-provoking and interesting and contributions. One of the things that I wanted to add, really, I suppose, picking up on Simon's bit at the end, which because I think part of what we're seeing here is there's a kind of a blame culture around it's the school that's to blame, and the reason for that, I think, is because it means we don't have to think about what the other reasons for the children's underachievement might be. And I've just come this afternoon from a lecture given by Stephen Ball at the University of Brighton, and he was saying, and we know that this is true, that actually variance between schools is a tiny proportion of what accounts for variance between children's achievement. That actually the vast, like 93% of the variance is social class and poverty. And that might be associated with complex things like diet and all sorts of other things, but ultimately it's class and poverty. And so the way that you tackle, children's underachievement, if that's what you're concerned about, isn't by beating up teachers, isn't by putting in tests at 4 and seeing how schools measure up. It's actually saying, what are we doing about childhood poverty, and what are we doing about inequality in our society?
Absolutely. Can I just be slightly devil's advocate and ask the panel to respond to, I know that there are points of view that are held by many people in early years that would say, or not many people in early years, but maybe many politicians and some people in early years, that would say we need to get 2-year-olds into school because disadvantaged 2-year-olds, we need to close the gap. And the way of closing the gap is having them taught by qualified teachers. The way of closing the gap is assessing them so that therefore we can see what the gap is and we can support these disadvantaged children. So what would the response of the panel be to that line of thinking? Because that's very much the Coalition, David Cameron, Michael Gove's stance. We're supporting the disadvantaged 2-year-olds.
Well, again, this is being driven by an absurd school starting age. It's a school starting age of 4 that drives all these consequences, and so you end up with a horrendous situation where very young children from deprived backgrounds are going to be exposed to even more developmentally inappropriate learning. So it's exactly the opposite to what the government should actually be doing, which is that children who actually come from those kind of backgrounds need to have a really good foundation in play, in social development, emotional development, physical development. All of those need to happen first before you start gradually helping children to be able to master some of the more cognitive tasks. And what's going to happen is when this gets in the hands of politicians and government, you are going to get very young children from deprived backgrounds being given the most developmentally distorted, inappropriate learning experiences, and that's going to have lifelong negative health consequences for them. So it would be a catastrophe, and it will be, and we've got to stop it. We've got to stop it happening.
Thank you, Richard.
Just to add, I absolutely, completely agree with that, because I think what is developing now is a bit of a narrative about, well, it's all very well for middle class parents to say that they don't want 2-year-olds to be, schooled, but what about the real disadvantaged children? And what it comes from, I think, is this really toxic idea, in the way that Richard said, that if you start formal learning earlier, that those children will just, it doesn't matter that they've missed out key developmental steps. It doesn't matter that, you know, their physical development is not, you know, it doesn't allow them cognitively to be able to cope with that kind of recruitment. You can miss out steps in child development if you're poor, and of course that is crazy. It's the most deprived children in society that need the most play, the most imaginative stuff, the most creative, the most creative, exploratory stuff, and the least formal, sitting on the carpet, crossed legs, listening to teacher kind of stuff that they are not ready for. Just one of the things people should look up, Sally Goddard Blythe, who's a neuro psychiatrist,
and she's got a chapter in
the
my
book.
Yeah.
She came to the parliamentary seminar that we held on the early years, and she showed a video of some of the research that she'd been doing, and it was about physical development, because of course people separate all these areas of development. Actually, she talked about how important physical development was for later formal learning, and she talked about the research that she'd done where doing this, you know, being able to individually pick out your fingers to your thumb, and whether you could stand on one leg for 8 seconds by the age of 7 was a real indicator for academic achievement later. And of course, if you miss those out, and you looked at children who maybe weren't making the standard or whatever, and a whole huge number of those couldn't balance on one leg and hold it. They'd missed out key aspects of their physical development, and they were not ready. And this idea that, you know, it absolutely infuriates me. Actually, you know, it's
also,
outrageous.
I think where we've missed the trick there is talking about social capital for families, and looking at sort of what came out of the EPI report. And the thing that we're all going to miss is the Sure Start model.
Yeah, where is Sure Start going?
More that they're all being closed down.
Yeah.
Would you agree that since this is all a back justification for some people, there are some people that like this idea, back justification 10 years ago under Blair, the idea that they wanted to increase childcare, they wanted to increase play for children, inducting children, but they couldn't justify a tax and spend treasury. They couldn't justify it without, if you can't test it, we won't fund it.
Yeah.
I remember I can remember those arguments going on about, well, in Parliament such as that, well, you know, we can't fund things like this. You know, kids just playing around. This is just a ruse for childcare. Oh, well, we'll give you something to test it. We'll give you tests and we'll prove it. Now, there are people that like this idea in the first place. That education is just another business. Education is creating all over the place now. But this idea, even good people are going along with this and saying, well, yes, at least the kids are can come together. At least parents are getting some burden off of them. So we'll test it for the funding, and this has blossomed out from there, even more gross in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Question from the back.
Hello. I'm not a teacher or any involved in education at all. I'm a parent of a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Fantastic to have a parent. Lovely, brilliant.
Well,
we want your voices.
It's very interesting and deeply scary and disheartening, frankly. And I wanted to ask what might be a slightly selfish question. My daughter is about to potentially go into reception, and we're debating this. It's a question about the relative risks of home educating at this stage. We're debating putting aside the sort of financial and logistical issues, which are enormous, but the relative risk, given that we're not trained educators, you know, we give her varied and challenging activities and all of that stuff. The relative risk of sending her off to reception in the school uniform for the next 3 years, or having her at home and risking not being able to have the skills to bring her on to then re-enter at 7 or 6 or whenever, 6 or 7 probably. Are we going to mess it up?
I know. I was looking at my colleague. I was looking at my colleague.
I just showed my colleague next to me. This is my children's report, and they've just got into year 1, and I went to see the teachers yesterday, and my son is operating below expectation. It just makes me want to cry.
I want to cry here.
It's awful. It makes you feel instantly a sense of panic, a sense of stress. I'm certainly in no way showing that to my children. It's just so deficit, it's terrible. It's shocking.
We had, I'm sure that Julie won't mind me saying, we had her amazing children with us at our nursery, and they are set for life, incredible children. And they came back to see us just after they'd had how many weeks?
A couple, wasn't it?
And her little boy came up to me with this big beam on his face, and he got a sticker, and I went, "Wow, look, what's that for?" For not putting my hand up and shouting out. How old was he?
Sitting quietly on the carpet. Yeah, well, what was it?
Our next door neighbour's had 3 yellow cards. She's a 5-year-old. She's had 3 yellow cards in this term for being disruptive in her class. And this girl is 5 years old. Yellow card system. It's like it's barbaric.
It is. I mean, I would say personally that thinking that you don't have the expertise, you have the expertise in your child. You'll know your child more than anybody else, and go with that gut instinct. And also, I know there's are you from Brighton? Do you live in Brighton? There's a huge home educating community, so it isn't a scary thing. I mean, I'm not saying everybody should be home educating their children. I'd like us to see changes made in education so that we can feel confident. Absolutely. I mean, I appreciate that.
Can I just also say that you've got, sorry about the advert, but you've got an excellent Steiner school here, which has got a kindergarten that goes up to about 6.5 or 7. So if you were able,
it's an extortionate amount of money.
It is. No, not extortionate. It's sort of it's beyond where we're at. So we're not sitting middle class going, my kids are like that.
Yeah, Jess.
I think the problem with it is, of course, on an individual level, it is. We talk about all the problems, and it is heartbreaking. When you hear your story, it is heartbreaking as a teacher to hear it. It's awful. But for me, you see, I don't think there can be an individual solutions to it. I think the only solution is a collective one, and I actually think that the only real solution is to challenge the system that we've got, and I think it's very difficult to do that through home education. I mean, people have got different views on it through home education, and I also kind of want to stick up for some of that. I mean, I know obviously that somebody's given the yellow cards and all of that kind of things, but I think there are an awful lot of teachers every day who resist all of those, and I think it's about trying to locate those, bring them together, and also as a parent to be upfront about, these are my values in this school, and if you're telling me that the school doesn't, my child's below it, but I want to know what you are, what's your ethos and values as a school, and does it, you need to start to challenge in that way as well. And I think without that, actually the vast majority of people, they can't home educate. They can't. And that's, and I also think there's things that they get out of being at school. I'd have a shorter school day and not have them there, all the time, and not have them doing the kinds of things that they're doing and all of that kind of things. But I think individual solutions are not a solution to trying to fix the problem. Yeah.
Simon, you wanted to respond as well?
Yeah, I know there's lots and lots of valuable things from the floor, but I just make a quick response to some of the things that have been said so far. My boy's 8 now, and when he was going into reception, this is just an aside, this isn't my main point, I faced exactly the same kind of, what am I going to do? And part of the problem, I think, I don't know how flexible schools here in Brighton are. I live in West Sussex, my son goes to school in West Sussex. We were able to negotiate a deal whereby he went part-time. And the school were willing to take that. But that is an unusual situation. That is a head teacher who's willing to say, okay, you've put a good argument for why you think your child will benefit from not being at school full-time. I've listened. Okay, he's got the place. He can go part-time for the time being. Now, I think if parents feel confident enough and have the arguments to make that case, some head teachers might listen. I suspect lots wouldn't.
How long were you allowed to do that?
Was that past 5?
No, reception year. He's summer born.
For a year, yeah.
I'd have been well impressed if that was past 5.
Yeah. My other point, though, and this is perhaps a bigger point, is takes me back to where I started off with my little discussion a minute ago, is there are lots and lots of teachers now, perhaps like the teachers in some of the schools that your children are attending, who've perhaps, through no fault of their own, begun to forget what they actually do really well. They've actually begun to forget that as an early years teacher, they have a range of skills and expertise, a richness of experience which they can bring to those children's lives, and they've begun to believe what is being constantly told to them, that what is important is that which is measurable by the end of the key stage in terms of maths and English, literacy and numeracy. And they've begun to think, perhaps I'm not so good unless I can hit those targets. And the only people who that pain on the part of the teacher is going to get passed on to is the kids. If the teachers begin to falter in their own confidence, if they begin to think, what I'm doing isn't really benefiting these kids because it's just play, if they begin to think, what I'm doing is not benefiting these kids because it's not getting them to their targets quickly enough, then the stress and the pressure of that is only going to come out directed at the kids.
When I talked to the teachers, they were fully in agreement with me, and they reassured me that they've got a play-based curriculum. And I said, well, why do you need to fill in this piece of paper? And it's that they are under pressure to. And there's no. So I, as a governor, will bring that back to the governors' meeting. Why are they giving this out to parents?
That's what we've got to do.
You know, why are they fulfilling
Because that's about showing that they have informed you of where your child is at according to this thing that I've not heard of before. What's it called, Simon? Your predetermined
content domain.
Yeah, there.
Julie, what were they hoping to gain from that?
I don't know.
Who's benefiting from that piece of paper? No, but really,
well, I don't know. This is what I need to find out.
It's not a school.
But it's year one. If they do this for reception. And it's sort of at reception level, of course, they weren't underachieving, but in the space of 2 months now, they're underperforming, and it's a madness.
Something that hasn't been kind of named yet, but it's a vital issue in this area. Is that it links in to the whole argument about school starting age. Is that children's individual development is so diverse up till the age of about 6 or 7 that actually to even think about children of that age in terms of whether they're reaching expected is just a nonsense. It's a nonsense, an absolute nonsense.
I'm aware of the time, and I want to move us on. I think there's 3 questions. So if we hear the 3 questions, and then the panel could respond. Is that if we take all 3? Did you have a question at the back?
That's a really question. Just following on from those comments just made. I'm a teacher, was teaching reception for the last couple of years, and I think it's absolutely valid what you just said. The pressure on teachers. I feel like we're being made to teach in a way that we don't believe is right, but we don't really have much of a choice. And following on from what this lady said, when I had to assess my reception class last year as to whether they were emerging exceeded or expected, and all of the pressure, the conversation constantly from senior leadership, how many expectors do you think you're going to get? How many expectors do you think you're going to get? And me feeling bad, I wasn't getting enough expectors. And then when I had to report that to the parents, lots of parents came up to me very worried that their child was still emerging, and I spent a lot of time talking to the parents one-to-one, kind of reassuring them that exactly what you just said, when your child's a baby, they will learn to crawl at different rates, but they all end up walking, and it's the same with the reading and the writing. They'll all get there eventually, and it's not, don't feel like your child is failing, but it made me feel really kind of rubbish to have to report that to them.
So it can go either way, can't it? Because you go into a profession, you think you can make a difference, and then when you get there, you realise that everything that they're doing is making it absolutely impossible for you to do the job that you really, really want to do, and you can go two ways, just despair or
And also just to
start
finish that, the thing
campaigning.
that I found really infuriating is that the goalposts have changed.
Yeah,
Just like
of
you
course.
said, what they had to get expected was like end of year, what used to be end of year one.
Yeah.
You know, so it was almost impossible to achieve. So, yeah, very frustrating.
Val and Simeon, if you ask your questions and then the panel.
I guess mine isn't necessarily a question exactly, it's more an observation, but when Simon said that all of this that we're talking about won't make children more employable, I'm sorry, I disagree. It will. It'll make them employable under the terms that this government and the establishment want them to be employable, because my job, which I've just recently retired from, in a complete state of disarray because I couldn't stand what I was being driven to do, and I was being observed every day because I was refusing to do it the way I was told to do it, was that what I was actually teaching children to do was how to shut up, admire authority, recognise an expert, know when somebody was above them, and that is what education is planning to do now. It's got nothing to do with raising standards. I mean, as you've all described, education is about teaching children to reason, think, explore, be curious. That's not what we've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. We've been teaching them how to be good employees, which means shut up, do as you're told, don't ask questions, take whatever's thrown at you. That's what the education system is doing now.
And Simeon, your point as well.
I also say I do believe that central government drives a very pernicious agenda in early years. But I think it's also much more complex than that.
Can you speak up a bit?
I think it's more complex than just how central government operates, because now there is some collusion within the preschool sector. The preschool sector isn't of itself a unified form. There's maintained and there's the PVI sector. Within the PVI sector, there are old-fashioned community-based preschool provision, but there are also businesses. And the business model, we've effectively privatised already a great deal of early years education. What concerns me is in some of those business settings, you're seeing businesses employ very, very young, not very well paid, poorly paid practitioners.
Absolutely. Would the panel like to respond to Val and Simeon?
Can I respond to Val? Do you mind? Yeah, it's really interesting because I kind of agree and disagree, because I think that so much of education is it's about keeping order and social control. That's their vision for it, isn't it? And it's what we're always sort of trying to fight against. And actually, I don't really care, if I'm honest, about the needs of the economy. I only care about, the happiness, if you like, of a child growing into adulthood, and whether they have everything that they possibly can to make their life as good as it can possibly be. So I don't really care about the economy. But I think what is interesting is that even in their own terms now, this model is not really working. When they keep talking about, well, when you compare us to high-performing countries like Singapore, where, by the way, they have the highest suicide rate of school children. They chuck themselves off the top of their school buildings because they can't handle the stress. But, there's even in countries like Singapore, they are now thinking, well, actually, we need far more than just a basic kind of level of education if we want to develop the economy. So even in their own terms, they need innovative, creative, free thinkers, and they're not being produced. So at some point, that even there are all sorts of contradictions, if you like, on their side that we can start to exploit as well. So not that I care about the economy, but I think that is one of the things.
Can I also just say that I mean it's really sort of heart-rending to hear what you had to say, and yet I'm sure that this is repeated all over the country. That the kind of way the system works is, the irony is that it's the very best teachers who end up leaving. I've got really good friends of mine who had a very similar experience to what you've just actually described, who left teaching in despair, actually. And one thing that I'd just like to say is please, if you're able to, write it up and get it and publish it, send it to the TES, or because we need this to get out into the world what's happening, that the best teachers are being driven out of the profession. It's a scandal and it's a tragedy, and it's got to stop.
It's not just just to come back on that 1 second. It's not just the best teachers. It's the teachers with experience of another way. I grew up in education from 1970, as in I was a teacher from 1971, and I didn't. The first 15, 20 years of my experience was heaven. I went to school for fun, because I loved it, and because I could pick up on things that the children said when they came in. I didn't have to say to them, I'm sorry, you might have seen a cat get squashed in the road, but we've got to start literacy dead on 9 o'clock. I didn't have to say that to them. I could say, did you? Oh God, how did that make you feel? And another child could chime in and say, oh, I saw something. You could respond to the children's own learning and their own experience. You can't do that now. Their own learning and experience is irrelevant.
And that's what we have to challenge.
Exactly.
That's what we have to challenge.
Absolutely, Richard. And I also would say that that's what we have to protect in early years, because I think in early years at the minute we do have an element of that. We do respond to individual children, and this is absolutely. And this is why we have to resist this downward schoolification pressure in early years, because we do not want to, Emma doesn't want to be sitting like Val in a few years' time saying I've left early years because it's all about targets.
Can I just reply to Simeon?
Yeah.
In that I don't know whether you realise, but talking about the business model of sort of PVI settings and that sort of thing, the new statutory guidance, the revised amendments to the statutory guidance has come out, and there's a complete contradiction in it. And they're saying that anyone with the new early years educator qualification, which was the old sort of level 3, that sort of level, can only be counted in the numbers if they have maths and English. But then, a little bit further on, they say that a 16-year-old apprentice can be counted in the numbers of children.
So they've contradicted themselves.
Wow.
And that is in statutory guidance.
I'm very conscious of the time. I'm so conscious of the time. All right, last question.
I just wanted to ask, I'm here as a parent also. I have a son-born boy before the 28th of August who's due to start next year, and I want to defer his whole year really, but I don't think the council can listen to me, I don't think they'll accept it. So I just think I need to get some information about that and how much they're at a disadvantage.
There are big campaigns for that.
Yeah,
Join the campaigns. There are big campaigns.
I don't want him to start part-time or go, have half days till Christmas. I want him to miss the whole year. If
you Google Summerborn's campaign, there's a fantastic campaign that's been going.
6 weeks
it's been going for about 2 or 3 years now, and they have had major successes in terms of and you will have to take on your local authority. So don't imagine it's going to be easy.
But surely if he's summer-born, he's not legally, he doesn't have to go until the summer anyway, so he can stay at a nursery or something and just go straight into year 1.
He'll start after the Easter term, and he'll go full-time, and then he'll go literally, and then after his 5th birthday, he'll start in year 1. They don't want to miss reception. So I want him to miss the whole, just start reception at 5 a year later.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Right, yeah, I'll get
what I'm saying is that there are. Sorry, just to say that there are a significant number of families who've been in exactly your situation who have taken on the local authority and have helped them, and they've got their member of parliament involved, and they've won. So it is possible to do that, and in fact the people who actually run that campaign, they've all had that experience themselves, and they're brilliant people. So so go onto the website and actually contact them. Or in fact, you can actually send me an email and I'll put you in touch with them, and they'll support you, they'll help you, they'll give you advice as to how to deal with the local authority, etc., etc. Yeah.
time is getting away from us. Shall I move on? I think I need... Simon.
Simon, come on, Simon.
I was only going to sound one note of caution, which our friend at the back there may not want to hear these words. But depending on the area in which you're living, sometimes if you withhold, it's certainly the case in Winchester and Eastleigh area where I work, school places are at a premium. Actually, if you don't get your reception school place, by the time you get to year one, you may have to travel 5, 6, 7 miles to go to get your child a school place at all. That's one issue.
It's very tight as well, school space here, and it's
Yeah.
the local school.
That's one issue. The other issue, I'm not saying you should necessarily take this as the decisive one, but there is a question. If lots of people take the line, well, we need to withdraw our summer boards for those kinds of reasons, then there's the danger, I suppose, that washing your hands of that reception year means teachers and schools can say, well, we'll just get on with the reductive maths and English kind of stuff then, if people just want to take their kids out. And I think part of the kinds of things we're talking about here is, not for everybody, but for most people, trying to stay in and trying to campaign and fight and say, my kid's going to school at 4 because most do, but actually we want to try and make that experience as play-based, as positive, as progressive as we can for my child and every other child who does go. That isn't an argument that you shouldn't do what you're doing. It's just an argument to say for many people the choice is much more about, the decision is much more about how do we change school rather than how do we withdraw from school.
I realise we only have 15 more minutes, and so not as much time for this as I'd hoped. But on the seats near you, not necessarily on your seat, but somebody nearby you, will have a sheet of paper like this. This is where we'd like to capture your ideas and feelings about what a manifesto for early years education in Brighton and Hove might look like. So what priorities...